Being a truck driver isn't as easy as people think. Sure, you get to see a lot of places, but the endless hours on the road can really mess with your head. My name's Nick, 26 years old, and I've been driving for about a year and a half. I got into this after college didn't work out. Life threw me a few curveballs, and here I am, hauling goods across the country. This story? It's from one of my first routes, one that I'll never forget. I was hauling a load from New York to Kansas City, a solid 16-hour drive. I planned to split it over 2 days, but that night I decided to push a little further. The road was quiet, the kind of silence that feels peaceful at first but becomes eerie the longer you're alone. By midnight, fatigue hit me hard. I reached for an energy drink from the console but realized I was out. Rookie mistake. My eyelids grew heavy and I knew I needed a break. Pulling up my GPS, I searched for the nearest stop. That's when I saw it, an unmarked gas station. It didn't even have a name, just coordinates. Weird, right? But I was desperate. When I arrived, the place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The flickering sign barely clung to life, and the cracked pavement was overrun with weeds. I hesitated, but exhaustion won. Leaving my truck idling, I stepped into the store. The air inside was thick with mildew, and the shelves were either bare or toppled. It was like stepping into a time capsule of neglect. As I scanned the room, a faint blue glow in the far corner caught my eye. Intrigued, I walked over and found a refrigerator, the only thing in the store that seemed functional. Inside, there was only one item, an old wristwatch lying on an empty shelf. Its face was frozen at 3:15. Something about the watch unsettled me. Maybe it was the way it seemed too pristine compared to the decay around it. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. As soon as I did, I heard a metallic clang from the back of the store. My stomach tightened. I wasn't alone. "Hello?" My voice echoed back, unanswered. The shadows seemed to grow darker, pressing in. My instincts screamed at me to leave. Clutching the watch, I bolted out the door and back to my truck. Back in the cab, I locked the doors and tossed the watch onto the passenger seat. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Turning the key, I merged back onto the highway, determined to find a better lit stop. 20 minutes passed. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic thud of tires against asphalt began to soothe me. I even managed a small laugh, shaking my head at how spooked I'd been. But then, in my rearview mirror, I noticed something. The curtain separating the cab from the sleeper area swayed slightly. It was so subtle I almost ignored it, blaming the vibration of the truck. Then it moved again, more deliberately. My blood ran cold. Someone was back there. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe I was imagining things, or maybe someone had climbed in while I was in the store. I reached for my phone and quickly searched for the nearest police station, 15 minutes away. I could make it. As I drove, I kept one eye on the road and the other on the mirror. The curtain didn't move again, but the air felt heavy, like I wasn't alone. When I finally pulled into the station, I parked as close as I could to the entrance and jumped out, my voice shaking as I told the officers what I suspected. 3 officers came out, flashlights in hand. They approached the cab cautiously, one signaling for me to stay back. I watched as they opened the door and climbed inside. Minutes passed, each one dragging like an eternity. "We've got something here," one of them called out. What they found still haunts me. In the sleeper area, curled up under a blanket, was a man. His clothes were filthy, his face gaunt, but it was the knife in his hand that froze my blood. The officers quickly disarmed and cuffed him. As they pulled him out, one of the officers shone his flashlight on the roof of my cab. "Footprints," he muttered. "He must have climbed in through the top hatch." The realization hit me like a freight train. While I was in that store, this guy had been on my truck, waiting, watching. They took him inside, but something still didn't sit right. I told one of the officers about the abandoned gas station and the watch I'd found. His expression darkened. "That place has been closed for years," he said. "Truckers used to stop there until a bunch of them went missing. Locals say it's cursed." My heart sank. "Cursed?" I repeated, half laughing, hoping he was joking. He wasn't. When I got back to my truck, the watch was no longer on the passenger seat. It was on my dashboard, sitting neatly in the center. I hadn't put it there. The ride after that was a blur of fear and paranoia. Every creak of the truck, every flicker of light in the mirrors made my skin crawl. As dawn broke, I thought I could finally breathe again. The sunlight brought a fragile sense of safety. Stopping at a rest area, I stepped out to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it. Scrawled in the dust on the back of my trailer were the words, "See you soon." I didn't waste any time. The watch? I threw it into the first river I crossed, but even now I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Late at night, when the road stretches on endlessly, I feel it, that weight of being watched. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear the faint tick of a watch. There's something about driving at night that always felt both comforting and unsettling to me. The open road, the hum of the engine, and the way the stars seemed brighter in the desert sky. It all felt like freedom. But that night, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like the road was watching me. It was 2005, and I was hauling a load of electronics through Arizona, westbound on Interstate 40. It was just me, my rig, and miles of nothing but sand and cacti. The air was heavy with heat, even though the sun had been down for hours. My radio was tuned to a local station that kept fading in and out, but I caught bits of a story about truckers disappearing in the area. Urban legend, I muttered to myself, turning the volume down. I'd been driving for hours without a break. The plan was to push through to Flagstaff, but exhaustion was creeping in. The road stretched on, straight and empty, with no headlights ahead or behind. That's when I saw her. At first I thought it was a mirage. A woman stood on the shoulder of the road, her figure illuminated by my high beams. She wasn't waving or signaling for help, just standing there, her blonde hair catching the light. She wore a white dress, the kind you'd see in old wedding photos, fluttering slightly in the desert breeze. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but something about her made me slow down. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity. I rolled down the window as I pulled up next to her. "You okay?" I called out. She didn't answer right away. She just tilted her head slightly, looking at me with eyes that seemed too dark, even for the night. "Can you take me a little further?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but it sent a chill through me. I hesitated. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here," she said, her lips barely moving. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. She climbed in, her movements smooth and deliberate, and sat quietly in the passenger seat. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine as I merged back onto the road. From the moment she got in, the cab felt wrong. Colder, heavy, like the air was thicker somehow. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. I turned up the radio to break the silence, but static filled the speakers. I tried changing the station, but every channel was the same. "Sorry," I muttered, turning it off. She didn't respond. "So, what were you doing out there?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Waiting," she said, her voice barely audible. "For what?" She turned her head slightly, her dark eyes locking onto mine for a moment. "For you." A nervous laugh escaped me. "Well, lucky me, I guess." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something about her was off. Her dress was pristine, not a speck of dirt or dust, even though she'd been walking on the side of a desert highway. And her skin, it was pale, too pale, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart skipped a beat. She wasn't there. Her seat was empty in the reflection. I stole a quick look at the passenger seat. She was still there, sitting as calm as ever. I blinked, then looked back at the mirror. Still empty. My grip tightened on the wheel. "Everything okay?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft but unnervingly calm. "Yeah," I lied, my throat dry. Just tired. I kept driving, trying to ignore the growing weight in my chest. She didn't speak again, didn't move, didn't blink. I couldn't take it anymore. "Look," I said, forcing a steady tone. "There's a truck stop up ahead. I'll drop you off there." She turned to face me fully, her expression unreadable. "I'm not going there," she said flatly. Something in her voice froze me. "Well, you can't stay in here," I shot back, my nerves fraying. Her smile returned, wider this time. "I've already been where I'm going." Before I could respond, the truck's headlights flickered. Then the engine sputtered. The entire cab went dark, coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed a flashlight, muttering curses as I stepped out to check the engine. The desert was silent, the kind of silence that pressed on your ears. When I climbed back into the cab, she was gone. My chest tightened as I scanned the empty seat. My hands trembled as I reached for the keys, but the truck wouldn't start. I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. She was standing in the middle of the road, staring at me. Her head tilted again, and even from the distance I could feel her gaze piercing through the windshield. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door startled me. I whipped my head around to see another trucker standing outside. He was older, his face weathered, but there was concern in his eyes. "You all right, son?" he asked as I rolled down the window. I didn't even know how to respond. "There was a woman," I started, my voice shaky. He frowned. "Woman? Out here? You've been on this stretch too long, son. You're seeing things." "No, I swear." "Listen," he interrupted, his tone serious. "If you saw her, you're lucky she's gone. Just don't stop again. Whatever you do, don't stop." At the truck stop later, I found the man again. His name was Jim, and he'd been on these roads for decades. "What did you mean back there?" I asked. "About not stopping?" Jim sighed, his gaze heavy. "You ever hear about the Desert Bride?" He told me the story. A woman who died on her wedding night, wandering the highway ever since. Some say she was looking for someone to take her to her groom. Others believe she was no woman at all, but something darker, luring people into the desert. "She doesn't just want a ride," Jim said. "She wants company. Forever." That night I drove with the lights of the truck stop fading behind me, my eyes darting to every shadow along the road. I don't know what I saw that night. A ghost, a demon, or just a fragment of my own exhaustion. But one thing's for sure. I'll never stop for anyone on a lonely road again. You ever been out on one of those long, empty highways at night where the darkness feels thicker than usual? Like it's alive somehow? That's where this story begins. My name's Jack Dawson, and I've been hauling freight for over 15 years. Seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing like this. It was a Wednesday night, quiet and uneventful, and I was parked at a rest stop outside Carson City. My dispatcher calls, saying there's a rush load needing delivery to Reno. The pay was good, and I've never been one to turn down extra cash. They warned me, though, real casual, about weird reports on Highway 50. Strange sightings, they said, almost like a joke. I laughed it off. Probably some kids messing around or a tired driver seeing things. Happens all the time. The sky was clear when I hit the road. Stars above, the hum of my engine below. I kept the radio on low, flipping through static until I found some old school rock. But after a while, even the music didn't sit right. Something about the stillness of the night was off. Like the whole world had gone to sleep and I was the only one left awake. That's when the radio started acting up. Static. Sharp bursts of sound, almost like whispers. I figured it was just interference. Happens on lonely stretches like this. But then I swear I heard a voice, clear as day, through the static. "Don't stop." I froze. My hand tightened on the wheel. I tried laughing it off, but my mouth was dry and my heart was pounding. I switched the radio off and focused on the road. Just my imagination, I told myself. Too much caffeine, too many hours alone. Then I saw it. About 100 yards ahead, something was moving. A person, maybe, walking in the middle of the damn road. I hit the brakes hard, my tires screeching against the asphalt. My headlights caught them, a figure dressed in black, a hood covering their face. They were just standing there like they were waiting for me. I yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" Like they could hear me through the glass. But they didn't move, not an inch. And then, they vanished. Not like they ran off. No. 1 second they were there, and the next they were gone. Just gone. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my knuckles white. My breath fogged up the glass as the temperature inside the cab dropped. I could see it, frost spreading across the windows like icy fingers. My body froze, but my mind screamed at me to go. I slammed the gas pedal, tires spinning for a second before I tore down that highway. My eyes darted to the mirrors, and that's when I saw them again. The figure, standing on the side of the road, motionless, watching me. I didn't stop. I swear I didn't take my foot off that pedal for miles. My knuckles were aching from how tight I gripped the wheel, and my heart was racing like it was trying to escape my chest. Every shadow on the side of the road, every flicker of light in my mirrors, it all felt wrong, like the night itself was closing in around me. Then I saw it. Up ahead, there were flashing hazard lights on the shoulder. A truck pulled off the road. At first I felt a wave of relief. Another driver. Someone who could tell me I wasn't losing my damn mind. But as I got closer, something about it felt off. The truck's cab was dark. No movement inside, no signs of life. I slowed down, pulled up behind it, and killed my engine. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air outside was cold, colder than it should have been for a summer night in Nevada. My boots crunched on the gravel as I approached the other truck, calling out, "Hey, you all right in there?" No answer. The flashlight beam swept across the cab's door. That's when I noticed it. Bloody handprints smudged on the metal. They were smeared, like someone had been banging on the door, desperate to get in. My stomach turned. I tried calling out again, louder this time. "Hey, if you're in there, say something." Still nothing. My gut was telling me to walk away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I climbed up on the side step and peered into the window. The driver was inside, sitting upright in the seat, hands on the wheel, eyes wide open. But he wasn't moving, not blinking, not breathing. And yet, he didn't look dead. His skin wasn't pale, and his chest was rising and falling, but there was no life in those eyes, like he was trapped somewhere else. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the step. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The handprints. They weren't just on his truck. They were on mine, too. I turned and shone the flashlight back at my cab. The same smeared, bloody prints were streaked across the driver's side window. I didn't even think. I bolted for my truck, yanked the door open, and climbed in so fast I nearly hit my head. The second I slammed the door shut, my phone buzzed on the dash. It was a text from an unknown number. The message read, "You saw it too, didn't you? Don't let them catch you." My breath hitched. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. What the hell was going on? Who was them? And how did they know what I'd just seen? I tried calling the number, but all I got was static, like the sound on the radio earlier. That's when my headlights flickered. The truck's lights dimmed, and for a second everything went black. Then they came back on, and there it was. The figure. It was standing right in front of my truck now, hood down, revealing a face that wasn't human. Pale, stretched skin, hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, and the smile. That awful, unnatural smile that seemed to say, "I've got you now." I froze. My mind was screaming at me to move, to drive, to get the hell out of there. But my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was caught in their gaze, paralyzed. The temperature in the cab dropped even more, and my breath fogged up the window. Then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, they were gone. I snapped out of it, slammed the gear shift into drive, and floored it. The engine roared to life, and I tore down that highway like my life depended on it. Because it did. I didn't stop driving. Couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to keep going. My eyes darted between the road and the mirrors, half expecting to see that figure again. The highway stretched endlessly, the darkness around me thick and suffocating. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, up ahead, I saw lights. Faint, but enough to make me hope, just for a second, that I wasn't completely alone out there. As I got closer, I realized it was an old gas station, the kind of place you only see in horror movies. The sign was flickering, half the letters burned out, but it didn't matter. I needed to stop, needed to breathe. I pulled in and parked under the single working light by the pumps. The place looked abandoned. No cars, no signs of life. Still, I stepped out of the truck, flashlight in hand, and approached the door. It creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years. The inside was worse than the outside. Dust covered everything. The shelves were nearly empty, with just a few cans of soup and some expired candy bars. The air was heavy, carrying a strange metallic smell that made me want to gag. And then I saw it, writing on the walls. The words were scrawled in black, like someone had used charcoal or ash. They weren't in any kind of order, just scattered across every surface. Don't stop. Keep moving. They're watching. And the worst one, they take what you love most. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around, the flashlight beam shaking as it searched the room. No one was there, but when I turned back, I saw it in the mirror on the wall. The figure, standing right behind me. I didn't even think. I bolted out of the station and back to my truck. My breath was coming in short gasps and my hands fumbled with the door handle. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors and tried to start the engine. It wouldn't turn over. Come on, come on! I slammed my hand against the wheel, panic rising in my chest. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You can't run. They're already here. The lights around the gas station flickered and then went out completely, plunging everything into darkness. I could feel it now, like a presence pressing in on me from all sides. The truck finally roared to life and I didn't waste a second. I peeled out of there, tires kicking up gravel, and hit the road. But something was wrong. The highway didn't look the same. It was wrapped in this thick, unnatural fog. The stars were gone, and the moon was nowhere to be seen. My GPS? Dead. No signal, no map, just a blank screen. Then I noticed the fuel gauge. It was on empty. That didn't make sense. I'd filled up before I started this trip. The truck sputtered and slowed until it finally rolled to a stop in the middle of the foggy road. I sat there, gripping the wheel, unable to move. My phone buzzed one last time. The message read, "Welcome to the eclipse. No one leaves." The fog grew thicker, and the world around me disappeared. The last thing I remember was seeing them, figures in the fog, dozens of them, all with that same unnatural smile. And then, nothing. That's my story. I never made it to Reno, and I've got no clue how I got out. But if you ever find yourself on Highway 50 late at night and the radio starts acting weird, turn around, go back, and for God's sake, don't stop. You ever feel like something's wrong before it even happens? Like this gnawing itch in the back of your mind telling you to turn around? That was me, on the night everything went to hell. My name's James Miller. Been driving trucks for close to 2 decades. I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff out on the road. Drunks swerving into my lane, animals darting out of nowhere, even a guy walking barefoot in a snowstorm. But what I saw on the fog road, that was something else entirely. I'd just finished a long haul to Klamath Falls, Oregon. It was late, pushing 11 p.m., and I was dead tired, ready to find a cheap motel and crash for the night. Then, of course, the dispatcher called. "James, I've got a rush delivery to Coos Bay. Can you handle it? Bonus pay if you can get it there by morning." I wanted to say no. God, I wanted to say no. But the money was too good to pass up, and I had bills stacking up like crazy. So I muttered a sure, punched the destination into my GPS and hit the road. The route? Right through a stretch of highway known locally as the Fog Road. Every trucker in Oregon had heard the stories. Disappearances, ghost sightings, weird lights in the trees. Stuff you'd expect to hear around a campfire. I wasn't one for ghost stories, though. Never believed in any of that supernatural nonsense. But that night was different. The first few miles were uneventful. The road was quiet, lined with dense trees that blocked out what little moonlight there was. I turned on the radio, hoping for some company, but all I got was static. Figures. It was just me, my rig, and the empty road ahead. Then the fog rolled in. At first, it was just a light mist, clinging to the asphalt like morning dew. But the farther I drove, the thicker it got. Soon, my high beams were useless, cutting through maybe 10 feet ahead before being swallowed by the gray. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tight. Something about the fog felt wrong. It wasn't just the way it looked, it was the way it seemed to move, swirling and shifting like it had a mind of its own. About 20 minutes in, I saw it, a faint set of taillights up ahead, barely visible through the fog. Relief washed over me. Another trucker. Maybe I wasn't alone out here after all. I nudged the gas, closing the distance. The vehicle was a tanker truck, its massive cylindrical trailer reflecting my lights. But something was off. The tanker wasn't making any noise, no engine rumble, no hum of tires on the asphalt. It moved like it was gliding, smooth and silent, unnervingly steady. As I got closer, I noticed something on top of the cab. At first I thought it was a tarp or some loose cargo flapping in the wind. But then it moved, slowly, deliberately. My stomach twisted. It wasn't a tarp. It was a figure. Pale and thin, it crouched low on the roof, limbs too long, fingers curling unnaturally around the edges of the cab. My headlights caught its face. A gaunt, hollow thing with sunken features and eyes that were nothing but black voids. Its mouth moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. The driver inside the cab looked as bad as the figure outside. His face was frozen in a mask of pure terror, eyes wide and unblinking, hands locked on the wheel like a lifeline. He wasn't driving the truck. He wasn't in control of anything, he was just there. I grabbed my radio, fumbling with the dials. Breaker 19, anyone out here? I'm on Fog Road behind a tanker truck and there's... My voice caught in my throat. What the hell was I supposed to say? That I'd seen a monster? I settled for, something's wrong, real wrong. Anyone copy? The radio crackled, and for a split second, I thought I heard a response. But it wasn't words. It was whispers, dozens of them, overlapping and chaotic like a crowd murmuring just out of earshot. I turned the knob, but the whispers only grew louder. Then the figure turned its head. It locked those empty eyes on me, tilting its head like a curious animal. My blood ran cold. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the tanker sped up, vanishing into the fog. I should have turned back. Any sane person would have turned back. But I didn't. Call it pride, call it stupidity. But I kept going. The fog thickened, wrapping around my truck like a shroud. The air in the cab grew colder and my breath fogged up the windshield. I adjusted the heater, but it didn't help. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong. It felt like the warmth was being sucked out of the air. That's when I noticed the shadows. At first, they were just flickers at the edges of my vision. I thought maybe it was the fog playing tricks on me. But then they got closer. Shapes moved between the trees, darting alongside my truck. One of them ran parallel to me, keeping pace no matter how fast I went. It was humanoid, but its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. "This isn't real," I muttered. "It's just the fog, just a trick of the light." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. The shadows grew bolder, darting out onto the road in front of me only to vanish before I could hit them. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the cab with their insidious noise. "You don't belong here," they hissed. "Turn back." I clenched my teeth, refusing to give in. But the road stretched on endlessly, the exit signs never appearing, like I was trapped in some kind of loop. And then I saw it again. The tanker truck. It was sitting in the middle of the road, motionless. The driver was slumped over the wheel and the pale figure was gone. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop just feet away. The fog swirled around the tanker, and for a moment, I thought it might swallow me whole. I reached for the door, desperate to get out. But then the whispers turned into a scream, a blood-curdling wail that rattled the glass and made my ears ring. The pale figure appeared in my side mirror, its hollow eyes staring back at me. And then, in a voice that was somehow inside my head, it said, "You were warned." I froze. The pale figure's voice echoed in my head like nails on a chalkboard. "You were warned." My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body wouldn't move. I was locked in place, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The figure vanished from the mirror, but the whispers stayed. They grew louder, more urgent, overlapping until I couldn't think straight. Then the tanker truck in front of me began to move again. Not in the usual way, though. It slid, almost like it was being dragged by an invisible force. Before I could even process what was happening, the fog around the tanker started to swirl violently, forming a vortex. The swirling mist revealed something massive, a hulking shadow with too many limbs, and a presence so overwhelming I felt it in my chest. The air grew heavier, colder, and I could swear the thing was looking right at me, even though it didn't have eyes. It reached out, one impossibly long limb stretching toward my truck. My instincts finally kicked in. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, tires screeching as I tried to back away. But the fog didn't let me go. It clung to my truck, pulling me closer to whatever that thing was. My radio crackled, breaking through the chaos. For a brief moment, I thought I heard the voice of the highway patrol officer again. "James, don't stop. Keep driving. The exit is close." I floored the accelerator, veering around the tanker truck. My rig shook violently, the engine groaning under the strain. The shadows and whispers swirled around me, trying to claw their way into the cab, but I kept going. The pale figure appeared again, this time in the middle of the road, standing directly in my path. Its mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, as if it was screaming, but no sound came out. I didn't stop. I couldn't. My truck barreled forward, and just as I was about to hit it, the figure disappeared, leaving nothing but a burst of fog in its place. My truck roared down the highway, and finally I saw it. The exit sign. It was barely visible through the fog, but it was there, glowing like a beacon of hope. The whispers began to fade, replaced by an oppressive silence. The fog seemed to fight me, dragging at the tires like quicksand, but I didn't let up. My foot stayed glued to the gas pedal. As I approached the exit ramp, a deafening roar echoed behind me. I glanced in the mirror and saw it, the massive shadow creature. It wasn't following me, it was collapsing in on itself, sucked back into the swirling fog. The pale figure appeared one last time, standing atop the tanker truck as it dissolved into the mist. Its hollow eyes met mine, and though it didn't speak, I understood the message. This isn't over. I burst out of the fog and onto the clear open road. The difference was staggering. The air was warm again, and the stars were visible overhead. It was like I'd crossed into another world. My body sagged with relief, but my mind raced with questions. A few miles later, I spotted a gas station and pulled in, my truck rattling to a stop. My hands were still shaking as I climbed out of the cab. The bright lights of the station felt unreal, almost jarring after the darkness I'd been trapped in. A patrol car was parked by the pumps, and a grizzled officer stepped out as I approached. He took one look at me and seemed to know exactly what I'd been through. "You made it," he said, his voice low and calm. I swallowed hard. What the hell was that back there? What is that road? The officer sighed, leaning against his car. You were on Fog Road, weren't you? I nodded, still too shaken to speak. It's not really a road, he continued. At least not anymore. Folks say it's some kind of threshold, a place where this world and another overlap. People who go too deep into it usually don't come back. Why didn't anyone warn me? I asked, my voice rising. Why let anyone drive through there? He shook his head. Most of us don't believe the stories until it's too late. You're lucky to be alive, James. Luckier than most. He handed me a bottle of water and a business card. If you're smart, you'll leave this behind. Don't try to make sense of it. Some things aren't meant to be understood. I stared at the card. It had nothing on it but a phone number and the words, "in case it follows." I didn't sleep that night. I parked at the gas station under the brightest lights I could find and stayed in the cab, clutching the card like a talisman. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale figure staring back at me. Every time I thought I was alone, I heard the faintest whisper in the back of my mind. The next morning, I called the dispatcher and quit my route. Told them I couldn't finish the delivery, couldn't even go back to Klamath Falls to get my things. They weren't happy, but I didn't care. I'd seen enough. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that road. Was it real? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Maybe, but every so often when I'm driving late at night, I catch a glimpse of something in my mirrors. A shadow, a flicker of movement, or worse. Those hollow, black eyes staring back at me. And the whispers? They've never stopped.